The morning sun rose over London on this special day. It was the day of the king's coronation, and the whole city was getting ready. But inside Kensington Palace, the royal family had been awake for hours. Prince William stood in front of a large mirror, fixing his military uniform. The medals on his chest shined in the light coming through the tall windows. He took a deep breath. Today was not just any day. It was a day that would go into the history books. In the next room, Kate was helping their children get ready. Princess Charlotte sat still as her mother fixed her hair with gentle hands. Prince George was already dressed in his smart outfit, looking more grown-up than his years. Little Prince Louis was jumping around, full of energy, not fully understanding the big event ahead. "Louis, please stand still for just 1 minute," Kate said with a smile. She bent down to fix his small tie. Louis tried to stay still but couldn't help wiggling. Kate didn't mind. She knew it was hard for a young boy to stay calm on such an exciting day. "Will there be lots of people? Money?" Charlotte asked, her voice small but clear. "Yes, darling. Thousands of people have come from all over the world to see the coronation," Kate answered. She looked at her daughter with pride. Charlotte was young, but already knew how to act like a royal. Prince George was quiet, watching his father from the doorway. One day, many years from now, it would be his turn to wear the crown. William caught his son's eye and gave him a warm smile. He walked over and placed a hand on George's shoulder. "Ready for the big day?" William asked. George nodded, standing a bit taller. "Yes, father." The sound of cars pulling up outside told them it was time to leave. The royal family gathered in the main hall of their home. Helpers rushed around, checking last details. William looked at his watch and then at his family. "Remember what we talked about," he said to the children. "This is a very special day for our family and for the whole country. Just be yourselves, and you'll do great." Kate took Louis by the hand, while George and Charlotte stood with perfect posture, just as they had been taught. William gave them all a final look. His family, his pride. Together, they would face the cheering crowds and the flashing cameras. They stepped outside to find a row of shiny black cars waiting. The guards stood straight and saluted as the family walked by. William helped Kate into the first car. Then the children climbed in, their small faces showing a mix of excitement and nerves. As the cars pulled away from Kensington Palace, they could already hear the distant sounds of the crowds. London had transformed overnight. Streets were lined with red, white, and blue flags. People had been camping out all night to get the best spots to see the royal family pass by. Inside the car, Louis pressed his face against the window, leaving small fingerprints on the clean glass. "Look at all the flags," he said, pointing excitedly. Charlotte sat properly, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes were wide, taking everything in. George sat next to his father, trying to copy William's calm expression. As they drove through the streets of London, the noise grew louder. People were cheering, waving, and taking pictures. Some held up signs with kind messages for the royal family. "Wave to the people," Kate reminded the children with a soft voice. All 3 children turned to the windows and waved their small hands. The crowds went wild, cheering even louder. William reached over and took Kate's hand. In the middle of all this noise and excitement, they shared a quiet moment. Their eyes met, saying what words couldn't. They were not just royals today. They were parents bringing their children to witness history being made. The car turned onto the final stretch of road. Ahead of them stood Westminster Abbey, its ancient stone towers reaching up to the blue sky. It had seen countless royal events over hundreds of years. And now it was ready to welcome the next chapter in the royal story. The royal cars slowed down as they got closer to Westminster Abbey. Prince William looked out at the huge crowd. People stood shoulder to shoulder, some on tiptoes, all trying to see the royal family. Many had been waiting since very early morning, some even camping overnight in the cold. "Look at all those people," Louis said, his small face pressed against the window. His breath made a foggy circle on the glass. "There must be thousands," Charlotte said, her eyes wide with wonder. "More like hundreds of thousands," George corrected, trying to sound grown-up. Kate gave him a proud smile. The car came to a stop at the red carpet that led to the Abbey's big doors. Guards in bright red uniforms stood on both sides. Their golden buttons shined in the sunlight. A man in a fancy suit opened the car door, and everyone held their breath. Prince William stepped out first. He stood tall in his blue uniform with gold details. The medals on his chest caught the light and sparkled. The crowd cheered so loudly that the ground seemed to shake. William turned and offered his hand to Kate. She stepped out in a beautiful light blue dress that reached the ground. On her head was a small, sparkling tiara that had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth. The people cheered even louder when they saw her. Kate smiled and gave a small wave. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The royal children stepped out of the car one by one. George came first, walking straight and tall like his father. He wore a small version of William's uniform. Charlotte followed in a pretty white dress with a blue ribbon. She gave a perfect little curtsy that made the crowd say, "Aw," all at once. Louis was last. He looked a bit scared by all the noise and lights. He held back for a moment. But then William bent down and whispered something in his ear. Louis smiled, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The crowd clapped and cheered for the brave little prince. "Wave to the people, Louis," Kate said softly. Louis gave a big wave with both hands, moving them back and forth like windshield wipers. This made everyone laugh, and even some of the serious guards smiled a little. The family stood together for a moment, letting people take pictures. Cameras clicked and flashed all around them. This picture would be on the front page of every newspaper tomorrow. "Ready?" William asked his family. They all nodded, and together they began to walk down the red carpet toward the Abbey doors. Inside, Westminster Abbey was like another world. The noise of the crowd faded away, replaced by soft organ music. The ceiling was so high that Louis had to bend his head all the way back to see it. Colored light came through the big stained glass windows, making patterns on the stone floor. "It's like a rainbow inside," Louis whispered, not knowing he should be quiet. His voice echoed a little, and some of the guests smiled at him. The Abbey was filled with important people from all over the world. Kings and queens from other countries sat in the front rows. Behind them were presidents, prime ministers, and famous people from movies and sports. They all stood as the royal family walked down the long aisle. William and Kate guided their children to their special seats near the front. From here, they could see the altar where the king would soon sit. On a small table nearby was the crown, sitting on a red pillow. It was covered in jewels that sparkled even in the dim light of the Abbey. "Is that real gold?" Charlotte asked, pointing at the crown. "Yes, it is," Kate answered. "And those are real diamonds, and rubies too." George stared at the crown with serious eyes. He knew that someday, many years from now, a crown like that would be placed on his head. William noticed his son's look and gently touched his shoulder, bringing him back to the present moment. The organ music changed, becoming louder and more grand. Everyone in the Abbey stood up. The doors at the far end opened, letting in a stream of bright light. The ceremony was about to begin. Louis, who had been so good until now, started to fidget in his seat. Kate reached into her small bag and pulled out a tiny toy soldier, passing it to him without anyone noticing. Louis took it with a grateful smile and sat still again, the toy hidden in his small hand. The royal family sat straight and proud as the sound of trumpets filled the air. This was just the beginning of a day they would remember forever. The music grew louder as the king entered Westminster Abbey. Everyone stood up. Prince William placed a gentle hand on George's back, helping him stand straight. Kate made sure Charlotte and Louis were standing properly too. The king walked slowly down the long aisle. He wore a heavy red robe with white fur trim. Guards walked in front of him and behind him. Louis's eyes grew wide at the sight of his grandfather in such fancy clothes. "He looks like a king from my storybooks," he whispered to Charlotte. She shushed him, but had a small smile on her face. The king nodded at William and Kate as he passed their row. He gave a special wink to his grandchildren. Louis nearly waved back, but Kate gently caught his hand. "Not now, darling," she whispered. Louis nodded, trying hard to remember all the rules of this big day. Once the king reached the front, everyone sat down again. The archbishop, dressed in white and gold robes, stepped forward. His voice filled the huge space as he began the ceremony that had been performed for hundreds of years. William watched with serious eyes. He knew that one day he would be the one walking down that aisle to be crowned. And after him, little George, who now sat fidgeting slightly in his formal clothes. Kate noticed George watching his father and gave him an encouraging smile. The ceremony went on. There were songs sung by a choir of children whose voices sounded like angels. There were long speeches that Louis didn't understand. He started to get bored and squirmy. Kate reached into her small bag again and pulled out a tiny coloring book and a pencil. No one else could see as Louis carefully colored a picture of a castle, trying to stay inside the lines. Charlotte sat perfectly still, her back straight, watching everything with curious eyes. When the choir sang, she mouthed the words she knew. A woman sitting behind them noticed and smiled at the little princess, who was trying so hard to be grown up. George kept his eyes on his father. He copied how William sat, how he placed his hands, even how he nodded at certain parts of the ceremony. William noticed this and felt a wave of pride mixed with a touch of sadness. His son was growing up so fast, already feeling the weight of his future role. Then came the most important moment. The king kneeled on a special cushion. The archbishop lifted the heavy crown high so everyone could see it. The jewels caught the light from the windows, sending colorful sparkles across the walls of the abbey. "That's it, that's the crown," Charlotte whispered to Louis, who had stopped coloring to watch. The abbey grew completely silent. Even Louis understood that this was a special moment. The archbishop slowly lowered the crown onto the king's head. The moment it touched his head, bells began to ring. The sound was so loud that Louis covered his ears. Kate gently pulled his hands down, whispering, "It's okay." Everyone stood, and a loud shout filled the abbey. "God save the king." The words were repeated 3 times. Then music burst from the organ, and everyone began to sing. William sang in a strong, clear voice. Kate joined in, her voice soft but sure. George and Charlotte sang the parts they knew. Even Louis tried to hum along. The king stood and turned to face his people. With the crown now firmly on his head, he looked taller, more powerful. He caught William's eye and gave him a small nod. It was a private moment between the current king and the future one. A parade of people began to approach the king, kneeling before him and pledging their loyalty. William would be one of them soon. Kate gave his hand a quick squeeze of support. "Will Daddy have to kneel too?" Charlotte asked her mother. "Yes, darling. It's how he shows respect to the king, even though they're family," Kate explained simply. "And one day, people will kneel to George," Charlotte said. It wasn't a question. She understood more than her mother realized. George heard his sister's words and swallowed hard. The idea made him both proud and nervous. William, noticing his son's expression, put an arm around the boy's shoulders. Not for a very long time. William whispered to George, "Today, you just enjoy being a prince." George nodded, relieved. He leaned against his father's side, feeling safer. Through the rest of the ceremony, the family watched together as history happened in front of them. They were not just watching, though. They were part of it, a living link in a chain that stretched back hundreds of years and would continue long after this day. The time had come for Prince William to play his part in the ceremony. He stood up slowly, straightened his uniform, and gave Kate a quick look. She nodded with pride in her eyes. The children watched with wide eyes as their father walked toward the king. "Where is Daddy going?" Louis whispered, his small fingers gripping the edge of his seat. "He's going to make a promise to Grandpa," Kate explained softly. "It's a very important promise." The whole abbey watched as William approached the throne. The king sat tall with the crown on his head, holding a golden scepter in one hand. William stopped in front of him and got down on one knee. This was more than just a son kneeling before his father. It was the future king showing respect to the current one. William placed his hands between the king's hands and spoke words that had been said by princes for hundreds of years. He promised to be loyal and to serve the king. His voice was clear and strong, filling the huge space. George watched his father closely. One day, he would make the same promise to William. The little boy sat up straighter, trying to memorize everything. When William finished his promise, the king leaned forward and said something only William could hear. Then he smiled and placed a hand on William's shoulder. William stood up, bowed once more, and walked back to his family. "You did great, Daddy," Charlotte whispered when William sat down next to them again. He winked at her and took Kate's hand. The ceremony continued with more music and prayers. Louis was getting tired now. He leaned against Kate's side, his eyes starting to close. Kate put her arm around him, letting him rest against her. Even princes got tired during long ceremonies. Charlotte watched the ladies in the abbey, admiring their pretty dresses and the way they sat so properly. She copied the way they folded their hands in their laps. A woman in a big hat noticed Charlotte watching her and gave the little princess a kind smile. Charlotte smiled back, then quickly looked down at her hands, feeling shy. George was still paying close attention to every part of the ceremony. He wanted to remember everything. William noticed his son's serious face and leaned over to whisper, "It's okay to smile, George. This is a happy day." George looked surprised, then let a small smile spread across his face. He relaxed a little in his seat. After what seemed like a very long time, the Archbishop announced that the ceremony was nearly over. There would be one final song, and then the king would leave the abbey with his new crown. The choir began to sing, their voices rising to the high ceiling. Louis woke up from his short nap, rubbing his eyes. "Is it finished?" he asked, a bit too loudly. Several people nearby smiled at the sleepy little prince. "Almost, darling," Kate whispered. "Just one more song." Everyone stood up for the final song. Even Louis managed to stand, though he leaned against Kate's side. The music was grand and filled every corner of the ancient building. William sang in a strong voice, and Kate joined in. George and Charlotte sang the parts they knew. Louis just moved his lips, pretending to know the words. When the song ended, trumpets began to play. The king stood from his throne and turned to face the abbey. With the crown firmly on his head, he looked powerful and regal. He raised his hand in a wave to the people, and everyone cheered. The king began to walk back down the aisle. This time, he wore the crown and carried the royal scepter. Guards walked in front of him and behind him. As he passed William and his family, he gave them a special nod. William bowed his head slightly, and Kate gave a small curtsy. The children copied their parents perfectly. Once the king had left the abbey, other guests began to leave too. But William and his family had to wait. They would be part of the procession back to the palace. "How much longer, Mummy?" Louis asked, getting fidgety again. "Not much longer," Kate promised. "And when we get back to the palace, there will be cake." Cake. Louis's face lit up. This news made the waiting much easier for the little prince. Charlotte was watching the ladies in their fancy clothes as they left the abbey. "Mummy, when I grow up, will I wear a crown too?" she asked. Kate smiled at her daughter. "Maybe not a crown, but you might wear a beautiful tiara on special days," she said. "Like your tiara?" Charlotte asked, looking at the sparkling diamonds on Kate's head. "Yes, darling. Just like this one," Kate said. She didn't tell Charlotte that this tiara had once belonged to Princess Diana, William's mother. There would be time for those stories when the children were older. Finally, It was time for William, Kate, and their children to leave Westminster Abbey. A man in a fancy uniform came and told them it was their turn to join the procession. William stood up and helped Kate to her feet. Louis, who had been sitting quietly for so long, jumped up with new energy. "Now we get to go outside again," he said happily. The long ceremony had been hard for the active little boy. "Remember to walk slowly and wave to the people," Kate reminded the children as they lined up. "They've been waiting a long time to see us." The family walked toward the big doors of the abbey. Guards stood on both sides, standing straight as poles. When William and his family passed, the guards gave a special salute. This made George stand taller, feeling very important. Outside, the sunshine was bright after the dim light inside the abbey. Louis blinked and covered his eyes for a moment. The crowds were still there, even bigger now. People had been watching the ceremony on big screens set up in the streets. When they saw William and his family, they cheered loudly. "Wave to the people," William reminded his children with a smile. All three children waved. Louis used both hands again, making the crowd laugh and cheer even more. The royal family walked down the steps of the abbey to where their car waited. The red carpet was still there, but now it had small white flower petals on it. The wind had blown them from the trees nearby, making a pretty path for the family to walk on. "Look, Mummy, flower snow," Charlotte said, pointing at the petals. Kate smiled at her daughter's sweet words. Photographers clicked their cameras as the family walked to their car. They wanted pictures of the royal children for the newspapers and magazines. George walked perfectly straight, looking like a mini version of his father. Charlotte gave small, proper waves to the crowd. Louis sometimes forgot to wave because he was busy looking at everything around him. Just as they reached their car, a little girl in the crowd held up a small bunch of flowers. She had been waiting all day with her mother to see the royal family. Charlotte saw her and stopped. Without being told, she walked over to the little girl. The crowd went awe as Charlotte took the flowers and gave a perfect curtsy to say thank you. "That was very kind, Charlotte," Kate said proudly when her daughter returned with the small bouquet. The family got into their car, which was different from the one they had arrived in. This one had big windows so people could see them better. As they settled into their seats, Louis bounced up and down with excitement. "Can we go fast?" he asked hopefully. William laughed. "No, we'll go slowly so everyone can see us. We're part of the parade now." The car pulled away from the abbey, joining a line of fancy cars and horses. Soldiers on beautiful black horses rode in front and behind them. Their red uniforms and shiny helmets looked bright in the sunshine. Inside the car, Kate helped Charlotte put her small flowers in water. She had a tiny vase in her handbag, which surprised the children. "Mummy thinks of everything," William said with a smile. As their car moved slowly through the streets of London, the family looked out at the huge crowds. People were waving flags, taking pictures and cheering. Some had climbed onto benches or stood on chairs to see better. "There are so many people," George said, amazed by the size of the crowd. "They're all here to celebrate with us," William explained. "This is a very special day for our whole country." In the distance, they could see Buckingham Palace waiting for them. Its big gates were open, and guards stood at attention. Behind the palace, colorful fireworks began to shoot into the sky, even though it was still daytime. "Fireworks!" Louis shouted, pressing his face against the window. His breath made a foggy spot on the glass. The royal family's car turned onto the Mall, the wide road that led straight to Buckingham Palace. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches covered with small Union Jack flags that fluttered in the breeze. As they got closer to the palace, Kate reached over and straightened George's collar and smoothed Charlotte's hair. Soon, they would stand on the famous balcony with the king and wave to the crowds. It would be another important moment in this historic day. "Are you ready for the balcony?" William asked his children. "Will we be able to see the whole city from up there?" Charlotte asked. "Almost," William smiled. "And the whole city will be able to see us." The car slowed down as it approached the palace gates. The royal family's big day was not over yet. There was still more history to be made. The royal car drove through the big gates of Buckingham Palace. Inside the palace grounds, everything was calm and quiet, very different from the noisy streets they had just left. Gardens with beautiful flowers lined the driveway. Workers in neat uniforms stood at attention as the car passed. "We're home," Louis said happily. The palace wasn't really their home. They lived in a different place most of the time. But today, it felt like home to all of them. The car stopped at a side door of the palace. Guards opened the car doors, and the family stepped out. Inside the palace, more workers greeted them with small bows and curtsies. An older woman with a kind smile was waiting for them. "Lady Anne," Charlotte said with delight. Lady Anne was one of the children's favorite palace workers. She always had candies in her pockets and knew the best games. "Hello, my dears," Lady Anne said. "You all did wonderfully at the Abbey. Now we need to get you ready for the balcony appearance." William checked his watch. "We have 30 minutes, he said. "Enough time for a quick snack, I think." Lady Anne led them to a beautiful room with tall windows. A table was set with small sandwiches, fruit, and tiny cakes. Louis ran straight to the cakes, but Kate gently steered him toward the sandwiches first. "Food before sweets," she reminded him. Louis took a small sandwich with a sigh. While they ate, other royal family members began to arrive from the Abbey. Aunts, uncles, and cousins joined them in the room. Everyone was talking about the ceremony, how beautiful it was, and how well the king had done. George and Charlotte sat with their older cousins, who told them funny stories about when they were little at big royal events. Louis moved from person to person, showing everyone his toy soldier that had kept him company during the long ceremony. William was talking to his aunt when a palace worker came into the room. "Your Royal Highness," the worker said to William, "the king would like to see you and the children before the balcony appearance." William nodded and gathered his family. "Grandpa wants to see us," he told the children. This was a special honor, and even Louis understood that. Kate quickly checked that their clothes were neat and their faces were clean. They followed the worker down long hallways with red carpets and paintings of kings and queens from long ago. George looked at each painting as they passed, wondering if his picture would hang here someday. They stopped at a big door with gold designs on it. A guard knocked on the door, then opened it for them. Inside was a beautiful room with blue walls and gold furniture. The king sat in a big chair, still wearing his crown and royal robes. "My dear family," he said with a warm smile. He looked tired but happy. Come in, come in." The children approached their grandfather carefully. They had been taught to bow and curtsy to him now that he was king, even though he was still their grandpa. George bowed first, just as he had practiced. Charlotte did a perfect curtsy, and Louis tried his best to copy his brother, almost falling over in the process. The king laughed and opened his arms. "Come here, you three," he said. The children ran to him, forgetting the formal rules for a moment. The king hugged them all, being careful not to let his heavy crown fall. "Did you like the ceremony, Grandpa?" Charlotte asked. "It was very long," the king admitted with a smile. "I think young Louis had the right idea with his little nap." Louis looked surprised that the king had noticed him sleeping. "The singing was pretty," he said, trying to show he had been paying attention to some parts. The king laughed and turned to William and Kate. "You have wonderful children," he said. "They behaved perfectly today." "We are very proud of them," William agreed, putting his arm around Kate's waist. A clock in the room chimed, and the king sighed. "Time for the balcony," he said. "Are you ready, children? There will be many people watching." "We're ready," George said seriously. Charlotte nodded, and Louis jumped up and down with excitement. "Just one more thing," the king said. He reached into a box beside his chair and pulled out 3 small pins shaped like crowns. "These are for you, to remember this special day." He pinned one on each child's outfit. The pins were gold with tiny colored stones. The children touched them carefully, their eyes wide with wonder. "Thank you, Your Majesty," George said formally, remembering his royal training. "Thank you, Grandpa," Charlotte and Louis said together. The king stood up, adjusting his heavy robes. "Now let's go wave to our people," he said. They'd been waiting all day for this moment. Together, the royal family left the room, heading toward the famous balcony where so many historic moments had taken place. Today, they would add another memory to the palace's long history. The royal family walked through the grand halls of Buckingham Palace. Workers were busy all around them, rushing to make sure everything was perfect for the balcony appearance. William held George's hand, while Kate walked with Charlotte and Louis. They followed the king, who moved slowly in his heavy robes and crown. They reached a set of tall glass doors that led to the famous balcony. Through the glass, they could see the huge crowd waiting outside. The mall was filled with people as far as they could see. Red, white, and blue flags waved in the air. The noise of the crowd was so loud that they could hear it even through the thick palace walls. "There are so many people," Charlotte said, her eyes wide. She pressed her nose against the glass to see better. "They're all here to celebrate with us," Kate told her. She smoothed Charlotte's hair one last time and straightened the special pin the king had given her. Palace workers opened the glass doors. The noise grew even louder. The king went out first, followed by the queen. The crowd cheered wildly when they saw their new king with his crown shining in the sun. "It's almost our turn," William told his children. "Remember to smile and wave. This is a happy day." George stood up straight, ready for his important moment. Charlotte practiced her wave one more time. Louis was jumping with excitement until Kate gently placed her hands on his shoulders to calm him. "Now," a palace worker said, and William led his family onto the balcony. The noise was amazing. Thousands and thousands of people were cheering, clapping, and singing. The family stepped forward to stand next to the king and queen. William and Kate stood tall and proud, with their children in front of them. George waved just like his father, with a calm, steady hand. Charlotte gave her perfect princess wave, turning her wrist gently from side to side. Louis, excited by all the noise and people, waved with both hands over his head. The crowd loved it and cheered even louder. "Look at the airplanes," Louis suddenly shouted, pointing to the sky. Everyone looked up. Royal Air Force planes were flying over the palace in perfect formation. They left trails of red, white, and blue smoke behind them, painting the colors of the flag across the sky. The crowd cheered as the planes roared overhead. The king put his hand on George's shoulder. It was a special moment between the current king and the boy who would be king someday. Photographers caught the image, and it would be on the front page of newspapers all around the world the next day. "Wave to the left side, too," Kate reminded the children quietly. "Everyone wants to see you." The family moved a little to make sure they waved to all the people. Louis spotted a group of children holding a big sign that said, "We love Prince Louis." He waved extra hard to them, making them jump up and down with joy. Charlotte noticed some little girls dressed like princesses. She gave them a special wave and a big smile. The girls' faces lit up with happiness at being noticed by a real princess. George was more serious, trying to copy his father's calm, royal manner. But when a group of schoolboys cheered his name, he broke into a big smile and waved directly to them. "You're doing wonderfully," William told his children. He was so proud of how well they were handling this big moment. The king stepped forward, and the crowd grew quieter, waiting to hear what he would say. He raised his hand in greeting, and everyone cheered again. The king did not speak. That would come later in a special speech on television. But his presence on the balcony with his family showed everyone that the monarchy would continue strong for years to come. Suddenly, more planes flew over in the shape of a crown. As they passed over the palace, fireworks burst in the sky, even though it was still daytime. The colors were bright against the blue sky. Louis gasped with delight and pointed, almost jumping up and down until Kate steadied him. After several minutes on the balcony, the king nodded to William. It was time to go back inside. The family gave one final wave to the cheering crowd. Louis blew a kiss, something he had seen Charlotte do once. The crowd loved it, and many people blew kisses back to the little prince. The royal family stepped back through the glass doors, which closed behind them. The noise of the crowd became muffled again. Inside, the children started talking all at once about what they had seen. "Did you see the planes, Daddy? I saw girls dressed like me." Everyone was so loud. William and Kate smiled at their excited children. This day would stay in their memories forever. They had been part of history, and they had made their parents and their country proud. After the balcony appearance, the royal family went back inside the palace. It was time for the official coronation photos. These pictures would go into history books and would be seen by people hundreds of years from now. "Can we take off our fancy clothes now?" Louis asked hopefully. He had been good for so long, but his formal outfit was getting uncomfortable. "Not yet, darling," Kate said with a smile. "Just a few pictures, and then you can change." They walked to the grand throne room where photographers were waiting. Lights and cameras were set up everywhere. People hurried around, moving chairs and checking backgrounds. The king and queen were already there, sitting on 2 golden chairs. "Perfect timing," said the main photographer, a friendly man with glasses. "Let's have the Prince and Princess of Wales with their children right next to His Majesty." William guided his family to their spots. George stood tall next to his grandfather, trying not to fidget. Charlotte stood perfectly still, remembering her posture lessons. Louis tried his best to stay still, but his feet wanted to dance. "Everyone look here," the photographer called. "And smile." The camera flashed again and again. The photographer took many pictures to make sure he got perfect ones. Louis started to get tired of smiling. His smile turned into a funny face. Charlotte nudged him, and he went back to a proper smile. "Now, just the king with Prince George," the photographer said. This was a special photo. The current king with the future king who would come after William. George stood next to his grandfather's throne, looking both proud and a little nervous. The king put his hand on George's shoulder, just like he had done on the balcony. "Stand tall, George," the king said kindly. "One day, this will be you." George stood a little straighter, understanding the importance of this moment. The camera flashed, capturing the image of 2 kings, one current, one future. More photos were taken. The king with all 3 children, then with William and Kate, then the whole family together. The photographers wanted every possible combination. Finally, the main photographer said, "I think we have everything we need. Thank you, Your Majesty, Your Royal Highnesses." The king nodded and stood up carefully. The heavy crown was taken away by a worker wearing white gloves. Without the crown, the king looked more like the grandfather the children knew. "Well done, children," the king said. "You were perfect. Now I think it's time for some fun, don't you?" The children looked at him with surprise. They thought the day would be all serious business. "What kind of fun, Grandpa?" Charlotte asked. The king smiled. "I've arranged a special treat. Come with me." The royal family followed the king through the palace to a room the children had never seen before. When the doors opened, they gasped with delight. The room was filled with balloons in red, white, and blue. Tables were set up with games and crafts. In the corner was a small carousel with painted horses that actually moved. "A party," Louis shouted, running toward the balloons. "A royal party," the king corrected with a smile. "You've all been so good today. You deserve some fun." Other royal children had been invited too. Cousins and friends that George, Charlotte, and Louis loved to play with. They came running in, already changed out of their formal clothes into more comfortable outfits. "You can change now too," Kate told her children, pointing to a side room where comfortable clothes were waiting. The children ran to change. They came back looking like regular kids, not like the formal princes and princess from the ceremony. Louis had chosen a superhero t-shirt that made William laugh. "Much better," Louis said, spinning around in his comfortable clothes. Palace workers had prepared all kinds of treats: tiny sandwiches shaped like crowns, cakes with the Union Jack in icing, and special Coronation ice cream that was red, white, and blue in layers. The children played games while the adults watched. William put his arm around Kate as they watched their children having fun after their big day. "They did so well today," Kate said proudly. "They did," William agreed. "Even Louis surprised me with how good he was during the ceremony." The king joined them, now wearing a simple suit instead of his heavy robes. He looked tired but happy. "Your children are a credit to you both," he told William and Kate. "The future of the monarchy is in good hands." They watched as George helped a smaller cousin with a game. Charlotte shared her cake with a friend, and Louis made everyone laugh with his funny dance moves. It had been a day of history and tradition, but now it was simply a family celebration. The crowns and formal clothes were put away, but the memories would last forever. The party went on for hours, with the royal children enjoying every minute. As the evening came, the sky outside the palace turned pink and orange. It was getting late, and soon it would be time to go home. Louis was riding on the small carousel for the 10th time, his face glowing with happiness. Charlotte was showing some of her friends how to make paper crowns with glitter and ribbons. George was playing a game with his cousins, looking much more relaxed than he had been all day. "I think it's almost time to go," Kate said to William, watching Louis yawn, even as he rode on his carousel horse. William nodded. They've had a big day. But what a day it's been. One of the palace workers turned on a television in the corner of the room. The evening news was showing highlights from the coronation. The children stopped playing to watch themselves on TV. "Look, that's me." Louis pointed excitedly at the screen, which showed him waving with both hands on the balcony. "And there's Charlotte taking the flowers from that little girl," Kate said, smiling at the sweet moment that had been captured on film. The news showed clips from around the world. People in countries far away had watched the coronation too. There were parties in Australia, Canada, and many other places. People everywhere had celebrated the new king. "The whole world was watching us," George said quietly, understanding more about his family's importance. "They were," William agreed, "and they saw what a wonderful family we are." The king came over to say goodbye. He looked tired after his long day, but he still had a warm smile for his grandchildren. "Thank you for helping make my special day even more special," he told them. "I was very proud to have you all with me." The children gave their grandfather hugs. Even George, who was usually careful about royal manners, gave the king a big hug. "Will you wear your crown again tomorrow, Grandpa?" Louis asked. The king laughed. "No, Louis. The crown goes back to its special home in the Tower of London. I only wear it for very special days. Like your next birthday," Louis suggested hopefully. "We'll see," the king said with a wink. It was time to leave. The royal children said goodbye to their friends and cousins. Palace workers had packed up the small gifts and treats for them to take home. Charlotte carefully carried her paper crown and the small bouquet of flowers from the little girl, which had been kept fresh in water. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Louis asked as they walked toward the door. "Not tomorrow," Kate said. "Grandpa needs to rest after his big day. But we'll visit again soon." The royal family walked through the quiet palace. Most of the workers had gone home. The grand rooms that had been full of people earlier were now empty and peaceful. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floors. Outside, their car was waiting. The crowds had mostly gone home, but a few loyal people still stood at the palace gates, hoping for one last glimpse of the royal family. When they saw William, Kate, and the children, they cheered. The children, though tired, gave one last wave before getting into the car. As the car drove away from Buckingham Palace, The children looked back at the grand building. The royal flag still flew on top, showing that the king was in residence. Today was the best day, Charlotte said, leaning against Kate's side, getting sleepy. It was a day for the history books, William agreed, and you were all part of it. The car drove through the quiet London streets. The celebration banners still hung from buildings and lampposts. Empty chairs lined the parade route where crowds had sat all day. The city seemed to be taking a deep breath after all the excitement. Louis had fallen asleep, his head on Kate's lap. Charlotte was fighting to keep her eyes open. Even George looked tired after the long, important day. "They'll sleep well tonight," Kate said softly. "They've earned it," William replied. "They made us so proud today." As their car turned onto the road that would take them home, William and Kate looked at their sleeping children. Today they had been royal princes and a princess, part of an ancient ceremony watched by millions. But now they were just three tired children going home after a long day. The coronation day was ending, but the memories would last forever. Years from now, when George was grown and preparing for his own time to be king, he would remember this day. Charlotte and Louis would remember too, the day they stood with their family as part of history. The car drove on through the night, carrying the royal family home. Behind them, London continued to celebrate. Fireworks lit up the sky over the palace. Pubs and restaurants were full of people toasting the new king. But for William, Kate, and their children, the most important part of this historic day was that they had shared it together, not just as royals, but as a family.